going on, Rudy? So guys, this is Rudy Rochman. Um, I want you guys to meet him. A lot of you probably do know him, but for those that don't know, Rudy Rochman is super smart, super calm. Jewish and Israel rights activist. He's been all over the place, all over social media and YouTube, doing debates in the street and on social media. Has many videos, and he basically wants to be the bridge between the disconnect between Israel and the rest of the world, and get rid of the misconceptions about Israel, and bridge the divide between Israel and Palestine, or the misconceptions of Israel and the rest of the world. So, Rudy, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself in case they don't know you?
For sure. First of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone else for being here. I was born in France. My mother's side of the family came from Morocco and Algeria. My father's side of the family were born and raised in Poland and then fled to France during the Holocaust. So I have family kind of spread from everywhere, but our origins are from Judea, from Israel. That's where we were displaced from. I grew up moving around the world, living in France, in Israel, Miami, New York, Palo Alto, Los Angeles. And because I moved to so many different places, I had a sort of identity crisis growing up, trying to figure out who I really was, because apparently I was supposed to give a different answer depending on who was asking me that question. And I realized at a very young age, through an anti-Semitic experience that I had at the age of 7, where my mom, I, and my younger brother were all kicked off of a bus for being Jewish. The bus driver noticed my mom's shirt in Hebrew and asked us if we were Jews, and then forcibly removed off of that bus. And that moment made me realize that it didn't matter where I was born, grew up, lived in, traveled to, or resided in, I was a Jew. And what that meant was I was part of a collective group of people from the land of Judea/Israel. And that was my nation, my identity, my history, my heritage, and the identity that I would pass down to my descendants. At the age of 17, I left Miami, where I was living at the time, for my senior year of high school. I joined the army in Israel, served as an IDF Paratrooper. And when I finished the army, I started my university studies at UCLA, eventually transferred to Columbia University, where I graduated from. And that's where my activism took sort of an evolutionary step to becoming an ideological leader in the fight against anti-Semitism, against anti-Zionism, educating people on who the Jewish people are, and trying to bridge a gap, like you said, between different communities when it comes to issues regarding the Jewish people, or even when it comes to issues regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Because in my perspective, and we can go more in depth later, there's no future in this land where Israelis or Palestinians disappear. So if you are
Absolutely.
pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian, if you are actually anti-one, you're anti-both, because there's no reality where either disappear. And so you must come together in order to build a better future together.
Absolutely. So let me just give you guys a little backstory about how I came across Rudy. So one of my friends, I was having a debate with about politics, American politics, and Rudy's not really into American politics. He's Israeli, and he's into the Israeli politics. And when I spoke to a friend of mine, he told me, "Did you hear about Rudy Rochman?" And I said, "Who's that?" And he goes, he's a really smart Israeli rights activist. You got to listen to him. He's amazing. I said, "Okay, I'll take a listen." And I opened up his YouTube, and I checked out one of his debates with an actual Nazi. All right, not not the Nazis you guys think are just Trump supporter Nazis. No, it's actually like a real Nazi, right? And I was watching, and I was just absolutely blown away by a few things. Number one, how extremely calm this man is. All right. And how well reserved he is, and also how smart, and how you were able to not only reach the people he was debating, but in case he wasn't even reaching the people that he was debating because of their cognitive dissonance, for example, he was reaching other people that were listening in. Now, I was so hooked on these debates and watching him, and I was in such awe. I was watching his videos literally all night till like 4 or 5 in the morning. Went to sleep, woke up. The first thing I did when I woke up is watch again, and I watched it for the whole day. I called up my boy, and I'm like, "Bro, you're killing me right now." I'm like, I'm watching every single one of these videos, and it's really weird to say, as much as I am so pro-Israel, I love Israel. Israel is my people. Judaism is my people. I kind of felt a little embarrassed that I didn't know as much as this guy. And this guy's younger than me. How old are you, Rudy?
I'm 26. In a week, I'll turn 27.
I'm 10 years older than him, and I was just blown away by how much he knew and how much I didn't know. And it kind of sparked a little bit of like a little bit of motivation in like a lot of motivation in me to strive to learn more and to be a better person and to be more reserved in debating, because I admire his attitude. I admire his way to control himself. And when I was talking to my friend that introduced me to you, and I said to him, I'm a little embarrassed that I should know more, you know, like he knows my history better than I do. Like, that's embarrassing. I need to know more. So I wanted to bring you on, because I wanted my audience to listen and learn, because I've noticed a few things. A lot of people have a misconception and a bad taste in their mouth when they think of Israel. When they think of the Jewish people, they think of, I'm not saying all of them, I'm saying a lot of people. I've noticed when I put up a post on Facebook once, and I said, if you're a Trump supporter and you don't support Israel, you're not a Trump supporter. I ended up getting a shit ton of unfollows. People were messaging me, talking shit about Israel, and I'm not going to debate everybody that's messaging me. I get thousands of messages a day. But if I could debate anyone, I would love to be able to debate like you do. So instead of that, I'd rather have you on and help educate the people that don't know, in case they don't. So I have a few questions for you just to get started, if you don't mind. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Just to explain to the audience, what is anti-Semitism and what is Zionism, and how are the two connected?
Sure. So first of all, I want to make clear that, like you said, I'm not on the right or on the left. I don't see myself as an American. I support America's right to exist. I grew up in America, and I'm very thankful for the opportunities that it gave me, for the education that it gave me, for the life that it gave me. So I'm very appreciative of the society that I grew up in, but I'm Israeli, I'm Jewish, this is my home, this is my country. So it's not my position to be pro or anti-Trump. I'm pro many of the things that he's done. I'm anti many of the things that he's done, but I'm not anti-Trump for sure. And I would say that supporting Israel, or the idea that Israel has a right to exist, has nothing to do with being pro-Trump or anti-Trump. It has to do with being a good person, because every good person should support a right for a native population to have self-determination on their lands. Now, if you want to criticize certain elements of policies or politicians or acts or certain things, that's fine. But if you're against an entire group of native people's right to self-determination, then that's a form of being anti that group, which goes more into your question. So first, what is anti-Semitism? Well, anti-Semitism is a form of xenophobia towards specifically the Jewish people. But I think before we define anti-Semitism, we have to understand who the Jewish people are. Because a lot of people think that we're just a religion. And in my opinion, we're not. Because a religion is defined as a belief system in a God, deity, book, or prophet. So if you don't believe in that God, deity, book, or prophet, you're not a part of that religion. Hence, if you reject Jesus, you're not a Christian. You reject Muhammad in the Quran, you're not a Muslim. You reject the teachings of Buddha, you don't consider yourself a Buddhist. And in the other hand, if you do accept Jesus, you're a Christian. If you do accept Muhammad in the Quran, you are a Muslim. If you do accept the teachings of Buddha, you're a Buddhist. So it's defined as just a belief system for any people. And when it comes to Judaism, even if you reject the Torah and Hashem, you reject the Bible and God, you're still a Jew. And even if one were to accept just the Bible and God, that wouldn't make them a Jew. They'd have to go through a process of adopting an identity, a history, a culture, a value system, a language, a connection to a land, joining a collective nation from a specific land. So at a very young age, I already understood that Judaism wasn't this secondary identity, religion, belief system, but it was more so of a portable suitcase that was created when we were displaced from our native land called Judea, and we created something called Judaism. And we passed that portable suitcase throughout each generation, in which within it preserved articles of our identity, our history, our culture, our language, and everything else. And we passed that down generation to generation to preserve who we are. Now, anti-Semitism is being against that very group of people that we are talking about. And it usually plays in the form of blaming the problems of a society, or the suffering of a society, or the evils that exist within a society, or any sort of negative thing that a population experiences, and blaming that on the Jewish people. And it also exists with trying to minimize their experiences, their suffering, minimize and delegitimize their identity, and hold double standards to them and to their form of empowerment. Now, today, the way anti-Semitism is mostly played, especially on the left, is in the form of anti-Zionism. Now, before I explain what anti-Zionism is, I have to explain first what Zionism means, which
Exactly.
unfortunately, most people who claim to be anti-Zionist don't understand what Zionism means in the first place. So they define anti-Zionism as anti-colonialism, anti-apartheid, anti-genocide, anti any bad things that you can imagine, but that's not what Zionism means. In fact, if that's what Zionism meant, me and you nor anyone else would not be supportive of Zionism.
They think
Zionism,
Zionism means the occupation of a land that we don't even belong in. That's what
right?
they believe
So
Zionism. When I
Zionism, we
say
have,
they, I mean the people that are
yeah.
anti-Zionist.
So Zionism, very clearly in its definition, into what every single person that defines themselves as a Zionist sees it as, is the right for the Jewish people to self-determine on their ancestral homeland. It has nothing to do with the conflict. It has nothing to do with Palestinians. It has nothing to do with the Israeli government. It's purely about the Jewish people coming back to the land, kicking out the British, and reviving their civilization. Now, what happened post that or during that, it has nothing to do with Zionism, because Zionism is only the idea that the Jews should have a right to live there. So anyone who's anti-Zionist, in the word itself, what they're saying, even if that's not what they mean, they're saying we're against the right for the Jewish people to self-determine. Now, why is this anti-Semitic? Because there are different levels and many levels of xenophobia for each community. For example, if someone were to say that they think, let's say, every person of color should be killed, that would be a horrible statement to make. If
Absolutely.
someone were to make a statement saying every person of color should be segregated, that would be a horrible statement to make. If someone were to say every person of color, some sort of bad attribute, that would be a horrible statement to make. So you see how I listed different levels of degrees of how bad one could be racist, but they're all racist. But there are
Right.
different degrees to how bad and volatile their racism could be. There can be racism that's like, more systematic. There could be racism that's more subtle. There could be racism that's more overt. And it's the same thing when it comes to xenophobia towards other communities. So a form against the Jewish people is being against their right to self-determine in their land and have their home. Because if one was against Native American land rights, if one was against the right for Tibetans to self-determine in Tibet, if one were against Black civil rights, that would be a form of being anti-Native American, anti-Tibetan, and anti-Black. So a form of being anti-Jewish is being against their right to self-determine on their ancestral land. And again, that doesn't mean that you can't criticize Israel. That doesn't mean that you can't support Palestinians and want to find a solution. That doesn't mean anything else having to do with the conflict.
If they don't know that, if they don't know what you just said, does that make them anti-Semitic if they're anti-Zionist?
Yes, in a way, because if it depends if they're just using the term in the wrong way, but they do support the right for the Jewish people to self-determine, that their ideas and their beliefs would not be anti-Semitic, they would just be using a term wrong. However, if they accept the belief that Jews should not have a right to self-determine on the land, even if in their worldview, based on what they were taught, they think they're doing the right thing, because we have to understand something when it comes to conversation and communication between human beings. Everyone thinks they're doing and saying the right thing. It doesn't exist a person, I mean, maybe a very small minority of people intentionally doing something because they think that's the wrong thing. They're believing something because they think that that's the right thing to believe. But there are many people that believed it was the right thing to be racist, or the right thing to be anti-woman, or the right thing to be anti-Semitic. We looked in Nazi Germany and what happened throughout Europe, even during the past 2,000 years,
Right.
regardless to just what happened with the Nazis. So if they have ideas that are anti-Semitic, it's not necessarily a choice that they make to be anti-Semitic. It could just be ideas that they hold based on misinformation or based on the conclusions that they've come to, which force them to be prejudiced or against the Jewish people.
Do you want to address the last comment by Alicia Parks?
What
She
is the
says,
comment?
"Here
I
we
can't see the
go, here
comments.
we go again, and the anti-white. Whites are the only ones who can be racist with your example against people of color."
No, so whites are not the only people that could be racist. Anyone that is racist, the way I define, is someone that is against someone based on their physical features. I personally don't believe in the concept of race. I don't believe we should divide ourselves based on what we look like.
I
And when
agree.
it comes to someone being white, I mean, it's not only about their color of skin, because there are albino Africans and very pale Asians that have way lighter skin colors than many Caucasians, and they are not considered white. So today, when people are using the term white, it's not bad, but it's talking about an origin and a status of being European descent, of having a culture that descends from this group of people from Europe, and having a status of being accepted or seen as white in a white society. So that doesn't mean that being white is bad or good, or being black is bad or good. It's just a classification that has been created through the constructs of society, which again, I don't think we
Exactly.
should separate ourselves based on our physical features.
Do we have a black or white or technically a very polarized race problem in Israel?
I think the race issue has been a problem that has transcended every single society, but I would not even put it anywhere close to the issues that are experienced in America. For example, I grew up in the US. I went to a predominantly Black and Latino high school with 4,000 kids in Miami. It was called Crop. And even though I had many Black friends and Latino friends, and I don't consider myself white at all because Jews don't originate from Europe, nor have we ever been considered white in European or white countries. That's not to say that there's a problem with being white. But I definitely saw in my experience a division between those that were white and those that were Black. In fact, I can even remember an example of one time we had a hurricane and we couldn't go to the modular classroom that we had, so we had to go to a more structured classroom, and we didn't have assigned seats anymore. And I walked in late to the class and I saw the class basically self-segregate themselves. All the Black students went and sat on one side and all the white students went and sat on the other side. And I came in and I asked myself immediately, like, why are you guys separating yourself based on your skin color? So there could be other things. It could be a cultural thing where, a lot of the, African-American Black students in that school at that time, I guess grew up in the same area. Who knows what it is? But I definitely experienced a lot of racism and separation based on race in America in my own eyes. But when I came to Israel, this is not something that you experience day to day or in the system of Israel.
So Alicia says if he has no concept in color, then why did he use his example for only people of color that came from him? I don't understand. Should he use every single example of every race to make a point of just racism? We're talking about anti-Semitism, and then he just happened to use an example of people of color going through injustice. I mean, that doesn't mean there's a lack of injustice in other races. Am I right?
Yeah, that doesn't mean any other group doesn't have any other form of injustice, and that doesn't mean any other group of people are good or bad. I used people of color in an example, and I also used women. I also used Native Americans. I also used Tibetans. I used several different examples.
Right. All right. So I have a question for you. Can you tell people what is the history of Palestine? Because a lot of their argument is, Israelis are oppressors. They're occupying the land that's been there beforehand, and a lot of people, including Palestinians, I've noticed, don't really know their history. And that's not putting Palestinians down, because like I have a lot to learn about my own history as well, and I even admitted it. Even though I am Israeli, even though I've born and raised Jewish my whole life, there's always more that could be learned. And that's why I have Rudy on here, to not only help you guys learn, but also to help me learn. I'm also learning myself. So if you can explain history of Palestine, just for those that don't know.
Sure. So first of all, before I go into the history of the word, there's a lot of people who deny the identity, the suffering, and the reality that Palestinians go through. So Palestinians are definitely a real group of human beings, and in fact, they're cousins to the Jewish people. They're living, either in the diaspora or in the land of Israel or in other places as well. But the word Palestine itself originates from something way greater and earlier than who the Palestinians today are. So before we talk about who the Palestinians today are, the origin of this word Palestine, because every word has an origin, comes from the Philistines from the Bible. So the Philistines are the people of Goliath, if you know the story of David and Goliath, or the people of Delilah, if you know the story of Samson and Delilah. And they're basically this nation that existed off of the coast of what is today Greece on the island of Crete. And they functioned as the Vikings of the Mediterranean. And in fact, the word Plishtim in Hebrew, Philistines, literally means invaders. Polesh means to invade, and
Shlomo
Plishtim
knew it. Good.
means invaders. And that's because that's what they did. They were a polytheistic nation that would invade all across the Mediterranean, and they had many different struggles with the Jewish people, with the Israelites. And King David eventually defeats them. They go back into what eventually becomes Greece and assimilate into the Greek Empire. Now, after the Greek Empire rises and falls, later you have the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire was the colonizers of Judea, of the Jewish Israelite civilization. And when they defeated us, before they defeated us, we actually put up such a fight that a lot of historians say that we echoed Roman weakness across the empire, which eventually caused their downfall. But because we fought them for so long and so hard, so when they destroyed our civilization, Judea, they decided to rename our civilization Palestine. Why? Because that was the name of one of our former greatest enemies that were already wiped out and didn't exist anymore because they had assimilated into different cultures. But they named the land by one of our former enemies. It's like to say today that Chas v'Shalom, a country X would come and conquer Israel and rename it Hitler, because they know that this is a name specifically that would hurt the memory of the Jewish people. Now, the Roman Empire falls. The Byzantine Empire rises, the Byzantine Empire falls, you have the Crusades, you have the Caliphate, you have the Ottomans, you have the British. You always have a territory, never a country, never a state, never a kingdom, just a piece of land that is the territory that is called Palestine because that's what the Romans had called it as an act of colonization that gets passed down through different hands of different empires until 1948, until the Jewish people liberate that land from the British. Now, in the meantime of the 2,000 years, there are many peoples that moved into the land. 2,000 years ago, when this land was called Palestine by the Romans, this was 500 years before the birth of Islam. Islam was founded 1,500 years ago, and Arabs started to spread out of Arabia through the spread of Islam only 100, 200 years later. So there was a 700-year gap between the land being called Palestine, again, as an act of colonization, till Arabs even set foot in the land. However, for 2,000 years, this land was called Palestine because that's what the Romans had called it, and that's what other colonial forces had kept the name. And there were different groups of people that migrated into the land. You have Druze, Bedouin, Cherkessim, Greek Orthodox, Armenian, Arab Muslims, Arab Christians, and they didn't carry on the memory of Judea and Israel because they're not Jews and they're not Israelites. So they just called the land by what it was being called at the time, which was Palestine. And anyone living in Palestine saw themselves as usually a Palestinian. And a lot of Arabs, in fact, because of Pan-Arabism, even rejected the idea of being called Palestinian because they saw themselves as part of a greater Arab nation. But a lot of people did identify as Palestinian. This didn't mean that they were a part of a specific country. It meant that they were part of a region, and this region is called Palestine. Now, in 1948, the Jewish people made the price of occupation more expensive than the benefits of exploitation. And what this means is they made the British have to pay more in being in the land than the amount that they were gaining from being there. And they did so by basically terrorizing the refineries, attacking their military outposts, and forcing them to leave, which eventually, that's what the creation of Israel was. It was the liberation of this land.
Gotcha. So I have a question. So I have a cousin that served in the IDF as well. All my cousins served in IDF, but one of them in particular, he was military police, and he said that he saw some things. I'm not going to go into details, but he saw some things that made him rethink the whole thing, and he started to actually blame Israel a lot. He didn't see the other side. Now I know you served in the IDF, and you still do as a reservist. What experience can you take away from there that made the most impact to you, or has changed your mind or way of thinking before you joined, if any?
Sure. So military police is not combat. There are
Okay.
very different experiences when it comes to the position that you play within the IDF, because you can be sitting in an office somewhere in Tel Aviv in civilian location. You can be in charge of technology. You can be in charge of intelligence of different things with different countries. You could be a spokesperson unit, or you can be someone on the front lines that sees combat day to day, if there is combat. So I served as a paratrooper, which is one of the more elite units within the IDF as a combat unit. So I could only speak on my experiences. Now, when it comes to using your weapon in the IDF, there are rules of engagement. Let's say someone is walking towards me that is clearly coming in a threatening manner. Let's say they have a baseball bat or a rock in their hands, like they're coming with an intention to attack me. I can't just shoot the person. The first thing you need to do before doing that, the rules of engagement are: number one, scream in Arabic and Hebrew, listen, please stop, back away, stop approaching. If they
Right.
keep coming towards you, you load a magazine into your gun and you load the gun, showing them that you mean business, that you have a weapon. If they still come towards you, you glock the gun so you make a noise that the bullet has been loaded in the chamber. If they still keep coming towards you, you shoot in the sky. If they still keep coming towards you, you shoot next to their feet. And if they still keep coming towards you after all that, which anyone after all that should not be coming towards an IDF soldier, you shoot knee down. And the reason you shoot knee down is because if you shoot above the knee, you might hit an artery and the person might bleed out. And that is the rule for which one person is allowed to engage. Now, if someone is attacking you, shooting at you, or already throwing a Molotov cocktail, a firebomb, or whatever it is, then that changes the situation. You have the right to defend yourself. But if someone is not attacking you, there's an order of operation in how you use your arm in order to minimize the amount of attacks are. That's one example of how it is to be a combat soldier. I served on the border of Gaza in 2013. There was Operation Amudanan. This was before Operation Tsuketan Protective Edge. It was Operation Pullover Defense between 2012 and 2013. And when Israel bombs Gaza, you hear a lot about this in the media, it's not bombing all of Gaza. It's not bombing an entire street. It's attacking a very specific structure, a house or a building, in which there are rockets being shot out of that structure onto Israeli civilians. Israeli civilians going every day, almost a few times, into bunkers and bomb shelters in order to protect themselves from missiles raining onto them. Now, Israel, before they attack a specific structure, they warn 3 times. The first thing that they do is they send out text messages and they call every single phone in the region. And they basically say, listen, warning, in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is, there's going to be an attack specifically on the structure, go away. The second thing they do is they send out these drones that send out small leaflets written in Arabic saying, leave the area or else you will get hit. There's going to be a targeted attack here. And the third thing they do is they send out a knocker bomb that basically like is a loud firecracker. It's not an actual explosion that warns of another bomb coming. And they do these things in order to minimize, to the best of their ability, the consequences of war, which are civilian casualties. However, Hamas forces people to stay in those buildings, and sometimes there are civilian casualties. And
They
that's
do
a
that
consequence of war.
and they do
Yes,
that to
they do
further
that
the
to use these lives and to use them as political ammunition to get people to hate Israel. But if
oh, it's
person X
crazy.
pushed person Y into a fire, the cause of death may be the fire, but the murder is person X. So you
Right.
cannot blame Israel for not only defending itself, but doing everything possible to limit the amount of people dying. Now, I'm against any civilian dying. I'm against war. I think I work hard to bring us together, but I'm also against manipulating the deaths of those innocent people that should have not died and using their deaths to push another agenda that allows this conflict to continue. But I will tell you something, for example, that I condemn from my experience as an IDF soldier. Now, I serve as a reservist. And as a reservist, I was about 2 years ago on the border around where Nablus is, around Shechem. I was protecting a community called Elon Moreh. There were 2 or 3 times that we actually stopped terrorist individuals that don't represent all Palestinians, but individuals nonetheless that sought out to do stabbing attacks. That was the height of a lot of stabbing attacks happening at the time. And after about a week there, the first week we got there, one of my friends was on patrol, and a Palestinian, again, who represents only his own actions, does not represent the collective of Palestinians, came out of his car and stabbed him once in the face and twice in the back. Now, his face was basically slashed, and he has a scar like this for the rest of his life, and he got a few stabs on his neck and on the back. Now, miraculously, he actually survived. The guy has a wife and kids and everything else. When we're reservists, we're coming out of our civilian lives and coming back to serve in the army. And the individual who committed this act went into hiding into one of the communities nearby. Now, in order to find this person, which what we needed to do, we had to clear out the radius around where the attack happened. And that area included also olive fields in the region, not all the olive fields of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, but only the ones of that specific area. And it was the peak of when they were harvesting olives. So you had a lot of people harvesting those olives. And it was my job at that time to go to the olive tree place where they had many trees and to tell the people that were harvesting the olives that they had to go back to their homes until we find this individual. It's basically a crime scene. And then when we find the individual and it's cleared, you can come back. So that's what our instructions were. And I went to this family picking the olives, and I told them, listen, I don't want to bother you. I'm sorry if you might experience it this way, but unfortunately there was a person who stabbed a soldier and he ran in this direction. And because this is a crime scene, we have to tell everyone to go to their houses. We have to search the area. And once we finish searching the area, you can come back. I don't mean to cause you any discomfort. And he looked at me in the eyes and with a very human, kind say, I understand. Thank you for explaining it to me. I'll take my family to go. Now, the officer there comes to me after and he's like, why did you explain it to them? And I told him to explain it to them. They don't want to have to tell them to not harvest their olives. I want them to understand what is going on, and I don't want them to get to the conclusion to hate me. He's like, no, they don't deserve an explanation. Just tell them to leave. And unfortunately, some people, don't have compassion, don't have an ability to communicate. Not everyone has those skills. And sometimes the experience, like let's say if it was that person who went and told them to leave, it would have been, hey, leave. Now,
Right.
they have to leave because it's a crime scene and you're the security force that needs to figure out what's going on. However, the way that you do things can change tremendously the way and the perception that one may have towards what that situation is. So that's the only example in my experience in the IDF that I can condemn as to this is something that I clearly saw that shouldn't have happened or shouldn't have been. And it wasn't even something that really happened. It was something that someone told me to do, which I didn't do because I had already done the right thing before that person spoke to me.
Gotcha. I want to address one of these comments here. So someone says, "Yeah, right, Rudy. What about the children that get shot by IDF soldiers? Children under 10?"
So, this is again.
I,
Let me just address it. It's against. I'm against the shooting of anyone. Of course, I will support the right for people to defend themselves. So if they have to shoot in order to defend themselves, then I support them in doing so. But I believe that we can try to find a way not to get into those situations. And I definitely condemn any murder of any innocent individuals. There have been Palestinian innocent individuals that have been killed, but for the most part, they're not innocent. And for the most part, when they were innocent and killed, there was a context there for the person who ran over a gate in a very heated area and reached for something in their bags, and then there was a mistake and something happens, which is a horrible, tragic situation. Out of context is not even caring about the lives that were lost, because the references that one is making and a lot of media that I see being pushed out is basically they take out the context of a 14, 15, 16-year-old throwing a firebomb at a car of Israeli civilians or stabbing an IDF soldier or doing something violent towards someone else, towards another human being. And then the response to that attack is an IDF soldier shooting back or someone else fighting back. And they cut the video, what happens before, and they only show you what happens after. So
propaganda.
no, yeah, so the answer to that person is no, that's not what the Israeli army does. By the way, every single Israeli citizen that isn't religious and that is Jewish has to do the army, so men and women. And we're basically 18, 19-year-olds that go into the army. So we're human beings. Instead of going to college and traveling and working, we're going into the army. And to generalize an entire group of people by maybe the action of one or two that has happened in many years, or instances that are intentionally taken out of context to manipulate their deaths in order to get people to demonize Israel, which again causes this conflict to continue, because the fuel to this conflict is pinning all the problems on one side or the other and making it seem as a zero-sum game. So when you make the reality on the ground seem as to be pro-Palestinian, you have to be anti-Israeli, or to be pro-Israeli, you have to be anti-Palestinian, that is a part of the problem as to why we're still in a conflict.
That's why I just came out with the rap recently called the Illogical Left, and the reason why I say that is because they use a lot of the left in this country tend to use straw man arguments, and it's becoming a pattern. It's becoming monotonous to the point where it's like they attack your character just because you disagree with them. Like I said, if I'm pro-Israel, then I'm anti-Palestine. Why? Why do I have to be anti-Palestine just because I'm pro-Israel? So that's that. I came out with that video. You guys want to check that out? I have another question here. So I consider myself a moderate that maybe leans right a little bit. I've actually done an actual test on myself to see where I stand politically, and it said I was a libertarian. So I know there's an extreme right and extreme left that is causing a lot of division and polarization in today's politics. And I also see a lot of that happening in Israel based on what I see. you have a left and a right, and an extreme left, extreme right in Israel. And I've seen some riots actually in Israel going down with the protesting the lockdowns and stuff like that. Can you just elaborate on your view of the division and polarization of politics in Israel when it comes to the extreme left and extreme right, and what's the difference?
Sure. So we have to first understand that left and right in Israel is different than left and right in America.
Okay.
And left in Israel means someone who usually, I'm talking about those that vote left, not politicians on the left. Someone who votes to the left is usually someone who cares more about human rights, justice, minority rights, liberation, stuff like that. Someone on the right is usually someone who cares more about identity, about Jewish identity, about security, and usually things related to those issues. So someone that is voting on the right doesn't necessarily mean they don't agree with what people on the vote left for. It just means they prioritize those things first, and vice versa on the left. I think the way the political structure in Israel is basically made is a remnants of what the British had left over with the British parliamentary system when they were still here in control of the land. And the British parliamentary system.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, now I hear you.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. In and out. Sorry, guys. He's having some technical difficulties. The Wi-Fi in Israel isn't so great based on my experience, but it's working now. I can you hear me?
Yeah, okay. I can hear you,
Rudy?
but
Yeah?
you're still
Okay.
frozen. But as long as you can hear me, I can still talk.
I can hear you. Guys, can you hear him? Can you see him?
Okay,
Can you see him clearly? Yeah.
perfect.
All right, keep going.
So the parliamentary system is basically made for there to be small interest groups, small different parties, and you have a total of 120 seats in the Knesset in the parliament. Depending on how many votes you get is how many seats you get, and it forces there to be a lot of small parties, which causes the larger party to have to create the smaller parties in order to have over 51% of the seats in the Knesset in order to be elected as prime minister. Now, what does that cause? Every election is 4 years. Unless there is a break of the coalition where you no longer have 51% of the votes of the seats, and then you have a new election. Let's say the Likud that has 20 to 30, maximum 40 seats, having to create smaller groups of coalitions and then giving those coalitions the ability to impose policies onto the politician and holding the politician, the prime minister's even seat as a prime minister at stake as to if they don't comply with every little thing. Because if they don't do what they want, then they pull out their seats and all of a sudden you have a new election. So the structure is created for policies by smaller parties rather than something that allows the general population to create a vision of the country that focuses on achieving those things on the long term. And when I see the division between the left and the right, I don't think you have to be on the left or on the right, because you can and should support human rights and justice and security and identity all in one. There should be no divide and conquer of our society on these issues. So the way I've understood a lot of what Israeli society has become today politically is very tribal in a way. You have the left, you have the right, you have the religious, you have the secular, and it's almost as if things that we agree with but that we don't prioritize. And so it allows space for politicians to manipulate populations and focus on targeting the small needs of what they have in order to get people against each other to maintain power. And what that causes is an inability for the country to be united, an inability to find a common mission statement that allows there to be justice and identity and security and rights and religious connection, but also a secular way of life, and things all at once. And it's a very unhealthy way of running our country in Israel, especially for Middle Easterners that have certain values that are not really being represented in the country that we have today. So I don't believe in this division between right or left. I believe in trying to find a way within Israel to create a mission statement, holistic of the needs of the left and of the right people who are voting in that way.
Absolutely. But so far, it's I feel like it's a result of sensationalism from the media and propaganda. Everyone, the media needs to be first. The media is not necessarily about being right. It's about being first, getting the exclusive, making it as sensational as possible to sell and get clicks and views, and then it causes polarization. So, for instance, when there's a snowstorm coming in New York, I remember I opened up the newspaper and it said, monster storm mashes the Big Apple. I mean, it's just fucking snow. Relax. You know what I mean? And the media tends to do this. If the media tends to do this with the weather, imagine what they're doing when it comes to politics and division in this country. And it's a big problem. So I have a question. So my family perished in the Holocaust. I have family that survived the Holocaust. My grandmother, in particular, my grandmother's brother, and there's people out there that actually deny the Holocaust. How do you deal with that? Where do you think it comes from, and where do you think that belief comes from? And how do you deal with someone like that tells you, they deny the Holocaust even happened?
Sure. So first of all, to your point of the media, at the end of the day, the media needs to sell advertisement. And in order to sell advertisement, you need more viewers. In order to get more viewers, you have to basically broadcast something that more people want to tune into because it's more controversial or it's more eye-catching or the headlines are something, more worth you clicking on it and reading it. So the media will always sell what is controversial and try to manipulate things in order to get more people to click. But something that's also important about media is they will sell and cater to their audience. So if someone is more on the right or more on the left, or if the society in itself is more racist or more anti-Semitic, that's the type of content that you will see. So I don't necessarily think that the media per se, at least the way media is structured today, is necessarily the problem, although it is a problem and I think is more of a symptom. I think the problem is more the culture of a society. And the medias that represent the right or the left are basically an outcome of what those right and left look like in reality. When it comes to someone denying the Shoah, there's infinite amounts of evidence, physical, historical, pictures, DNA, bodies, memories, testimonies, there's infinite amounts of evidence that proves the Shoah time and time again. And unfortunately, we're living in the last generation that will even know or meet Holocaust survivors because they're already in their 80s and 90s and they're starting to, move on to the next life in the next world and starting to die off. So, but whenever I engage with someone, I understand that that person may be extremely misinformed. And it's not entirely their fault that they've come to those conclusions because if I was in a space or an echo chamber where I was being taught and fed all these different horrible things about a group of people and I came to certain conclusions, yes, I'm responsible for my own actions and my own ideas and my own words, but there's an understanding as to how a person like that were to get to those conclusions. So I try to be very factual, very calm also, because I'm not trying to antagonize the person that I'm speaking to. I'm trying to have a human to human conversation. And at the end of the day, we're all human beings and there's a spark of light within every individual. And I think that, when you start to work on spreading more light rather than more darkness, you're able to change and shift this world. And it may not be in the first conversation that you have with someone, but eventually I do think that you can start shifting the way people see things when they have bad ideas. That being said, if I'm in a conversation with, let's say, a neo-Nazi, which I have a few of those debates online, and I am very respectful and they
You
start
guys got to
to
check that
threaten my
out.
life or insult me, then of course I have to warn them that I will defend myself or defend myself if it ever gets physical. If someone insults me and constantly goes back and forth, I basically call them out for, making ad hominem attacks and not being even able to attack the content of what I'm speaking. Instead, they're attacking my character, which exposes them in themselves because I'm staying really calm and they're getting all agitated and screaming and showing that they actually have nothing to say. That's why they end up insulting. But if they're saying something problematic ideologically and not insulting me, through a conversation where you're bringing up facts, but also narrating in a way that's digestible for all that are listening, at the end of the day, they end up exposing themselves. And I think that's the best way to try to change things and to communicate things and to win a debate, is to allow the person, if they're saying something false, to basically show their cards and their true character. I will say that whenever I engage with someone, I don't know their opinions right away. So a lot of times in these conversations that I have, it's not like I knew what they thought before I even got into that conversation. But I also realize that in that moment, and the reason I stay calm, like you said in the beginning, is because it may be the person that I'm speaking to, or the people that are listening, it may be their first time in their lives that they hear from a Jew, or first time in their lives that they hear from an Israeli. And so in that very moment, I have a responsibility on behalf of all the Jewish and Israeli people to do the best that I can and to use my abilities in the best way possible to communicate and narrate my story in the best way, so that the person that I'm speaking to, or those listening, or those that will see the video later, can best understand us. So I think to every Jew, to every Zionist, to every Israeli, if you're speaking on a topic that regards all of us, you have to do the best job you can to represent your group of people, or the beliefs that you have and hold on to. So that comes with a responsibility. So it comes with a responsibility of being calm. You can be passionate, but you have to use that fire and channel that fire in a way for it to be most effective, and not just let it control you. You have to control it.
Gotcha. Yo, guys, can you see him clearly? Because it's a little bit blurry on my end. I want to make sure these guys are getting the best view. Is it possible maybe we can reconnect on this? Because it was cutting in and out. Not fully, but it was cutting in and out, and it was a little bit blurry as opposed to the beginning of this live. You want to try to reconnect real quick?
Sure, sure.
Yeah, let's try to reconnect, because I want to see if it's if that could be the culprit. Let me just bring you back on. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay. All right, guys, I'm gonna make sure I bring him back on. It was a little blurry. I just want to make sure. Uh, let's see here. Try to request me, Rudy. If not, I'm gonna try to add you on here. So, what'd you guys think of that so far, man? He's super smart. This is amazing, man. And a lot of people need to hear this. And if you guys check out his videos and you see one of his videos, he came out with debating a neo-Nazi. You know, it was one of the most interesting things I've ever seen. Him debating these Nazis with so much hate in their heart, and you could tell in their eyes they just hate Jews, and it's incredible seeing him hold his composure so well. It was just amazing. You guys got to check it out. You guys will love it. I don't know where he is now. Hold on a second, because he had a really bad connection. So I want to make sure you guys get the best experience. Hopefully one day we can do an even better one through a Zoom session or something. And then we'll go that route. I have a couple of more questions for him, and then I wanted him to address some of the questions from you guys, and then and go from there. Let's see. Is he here yet? All right, he's supposed to log on. There you go. Okay, bring him back. I am Israel. I came to a land without people, for people without a land. Those people who happen to be. Oh, that's a long comment. I can't even read that out. All right, Rudy. Here you go. There you go. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Rudy? I think it's the Wi-Fi in Israel, man. Because whenever I'm in Israel, the Wi-Fi is brutal, brutal. Like, come on, man, step your game up, bro. I got like 400 megabits over here in Israel. I'm lucky to get 50. All right, so I have another question for you. So this is gonna go a little bit beyond the norm. So, do you think what happened in the Holocaust was a result of brainwashing through propaganda, or do you think something spiritual was going on? And the reason why I say spiritual is because these Nazis were throwing women, men, and children into ovens and the most horrific shit. And then, they're killing and slaughtering children. And then that night they go have dinner with their kids. Like, you have to be a special kind of sociopath to be able to do that. So I think, there's a bunch of sociopaths out there, but to say all of the Nazis were sociopaths, I think is a stretch. When it comes to spirituality, maybe there was some kind of spiritual element involved to be able to make all that mass of people so disgusting, so hateful, and so sociopathic. What do you think?
So first of all, when it comes to the Holocaust, it didn't happen overnight. That's something that a lot of people don't realize. It took about a decade for the society to go from point A to point B, from the Jews being a part of the society in Europe to the conclusion that we need to have a final solution. And in between, there were a lot of demonization of the Jewish people through cartoons, through stereotypes. They were removed from their jobs. There were Kristallnacht that was actually done by the students. In fact, Hitler's big thing was controlling the textbook, and then you'd control the future generation. Then there were putting Jews with yellow stars. Then it was going into ghettos, and then it was going to concentration camps, and later to extermination camps. So it didn't happen overnight, and there was an evolution towards anti-Semitism. Now, why is there anti-Semitism to that degree that causes that is a very big question. It's a question that I'm sure many people have many answers to. It's one that myself I have many answers to. But I would say that there is a more so spiritual answer and a more so understandable, conceptualized, rational answer. So the first, I'm going to go over, first of all, the more rational ones. There is a lot of jealousy when it comes to the Jewish people because we make up basically 0.2% of the world's population, under that actually. And so it doesn't make sense how this small group of people are able to obtain levels of success in a disproportionate way. Now, something that's important is the vast majority of Jews are not successful. Yes, there are many Jews that are successful, but if you look at the majority, they're not. There are Jews that are very poor, there are Jews that are very bad, there are Jews that are good, there are Jews that are rich. You have a community that has many of everything. But disproportionately towards other communities, Jews are usually more successful. Now, why are they more successful? Is it because they're genetically predisposed to be more successful? Is it because they're doing something wrong? And the answer is neither of those. The answer is actually because of the culture that exists within Judaism. So elements of that Jewish culture which allows Jews to be successful is, number one, literacy. Today, most people in first world countries know how to read and write. This wasn't the case 200, 300, 400 years ago. But throughout thousands of years, throughout time, every single Jew knew how to read and write. Why? Because we have our bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. And we learn not only to read and write, but to question. And this rabbi said this, and this expert and sage said that, and this person argued this. So we don't only learn to read and write, we learn how to question and think critically and think deeply. And if no one was given an education of being able to read and write and to question and to think critically, then obviously those that did have that education would be able to use those to elevate themselves in positions of power, because naturally when you're educated, it gives you the tools to becoming successful. That's one thing. Number two, not every single Jew, but most Jews are raised in a family where their parents teach them to be good people, teach them to respect the rules, teach them to want to strive for success, to want to be the best person that they can be. This is a huge part of Jewish culture, and that's not to say that that doesn't exist within other cultures, or it's not to say that, the opposite of that doesn't exist within Judaism, but that's a minority, and the majority is to value being successful and trying to achieve and become the best that you can be. If you want to do art, be the best artist that you can be. If you want to be a doctor, be the best doctor you can be. If you want to be a businessman, be the best business. If you want to be a philanthropist or help a nonprofit, do that, So that's another element. And the third element of that is also helping one another. This is something that is very common within Jewish culture because we see each other as brothers and sisters. And thus, we help each other raise up. So let's say I wrote my essay to get into Columbia University. And someone says, hey, Rudy, I saw that you were at Columbia. Would you mind helping me? Sure, I share them my essay, or I'll connect you with this person when you're there. And you'll have the Chabad house, and you'll have the API house, and you'll be able to connect with the Hillel, and you'll be able to go there. Or, hey, Rudy, I want to get into fintech. Oh, my dad is in fintech, so I'm going to ask his contact. And we tend to help one another. Again, that doesn't mean that other communities don't help one another. That doesn't mean that every Jew helps one another, but it is a very deep part of Jewish culture to help one another. And because those elements of our culture exist, it allows many Jews to use those opportunities to rise up
Absolutely.
and become successful. So that's number one. There's a lot of jealousy. Number two, there's the element of seeing a Jew as another, but an other that is a problem or an enemy or a sort of traitor. And I think an element of this is from not understanding who the Jewish people are and thinking that we're some other group that is seeking to destroy the civilization we're in, which is actually the opposite of the purpose of the Jewish people. Within our own mission statement, our own culture, is to do tikkun olam and ol hagoyim, which means to be a light upon other nations, to help other nations, and to put light where there is darkness. So giving water technology to Middle Eastern countries that are in drought, or helping bring electricity to African countries, or helping when there's an earthquake in Mexico, or a hurricane in Haiti, like trying to do the best that we can to help others where there needs to be help. That is a part of our mission statement. And I think when we don't do that, in a way, there is that spiritual rejection. Now, before I go into that, understanding more of the rejection as a traitor, if you don't understand who the Jewish people are as their own nation from Judea, then it kind of causes a confusion. And I'll give an example of my own grandmother. My grandmother was born in Algeria, the mother of my mother. She moved to Oujda in Morocco when she was young. And in 1948, there was a massacre of the Jewish community in Oujda, and they fled to France. Now, she fled to France with my grandfather, grew up in France, created her life there, was able to make a living, had 4 children, had many grandchildren, I being one of them. And one time she comes to me and she says, I'm Jewish and I'm French. And I tell her, well, what do you mean by you're French? That's not your nation. That's not your country. That's not your homeland. That's not your ancestors or your descendants. That's your experience. And there's no problem with valuing the society that you live in and helping that society flourish and promoting that society. But at the end of the day, that's not your people. Your people are the Jewish people. And I think you should be honest about that. And she's like, no, I'm French and I'm Jewish. And I told her, let me give you 3 examples as to why, when you say that, it gives a wrong impression to people that are actually part of the nation of France. And I told her, okay, if there's, let's say you go to a market and there's an avocado produced in Israel and an avocado produced in France, which one are you going to buy? And she's like, the avocado produced in Israel. I'm like, okay, if there is, even another example, if there is the Olympic Games or a soccer cup or whatever it is, and there's Israel playing versus France, which team are you going to support? She told me Team Israel. I was like, okay, let me give you another 2 examples. War where Israel is fighting another country and France is fighting another country. So 2 wars unrelated. And you have to send your son to that war. Which one are you going to choose? And she said the one to defend Israel. And I'm like, okay, and last question. If you have $100 and you can only give this $100 to one family, and there's a Jewish family in Argentina, now not even Israeli, just a Jewish family in Argentina, and there's a French family in Paris that needs that money. Of course, Grandma, you would try to give it to everyone, but in this case, you could only give it to one. Which one would you give it to? She's like, well, I'd like to help both, but if I had to choose, I'd give it to the Jewish family in Argentina. And there's nothing wrong with that, because if you are going to invest in the education of a child, you're obviously going to help your own child first before someone else's child. That doesn't mean you can't also help other people. If you're going to help a family member, like 2 people and one person is a family member, one person is a random stranger, ideally you would help both people, but first you would prioritize that family member. So it's natural that she made those choices. But I told her, you see, Grandma, in theory you're saying that you're French, but in practice you're not. Now, I understand you have French citizenship and you should have equal rights in France, and you should, support the country that you
But
live in and help it,
maybe they
respect the
take a
laws and
little bit
help
of
it
pride,
prosper. But
being in that society. Let's say they realize that society is a good society, and like America, America is a free country. America has beautiful values and stuff like that. And if someone is American but Jewish, can't they just be prideful that they're also American, or say I'm an American Jew?
so this is something that a lot of people may disagree with me on, that are American, that are French, whatever it is. I was born in France. I grew up in the US most of my life. I don't see myself as French or American. I value the experiences that I had. I appreciate the society that I lived in, that I was born in, And I cherish it. And whenever I'm in America, or when I was living in America, I respected the laws. I tried to help benefit that society. I paid my taxes. So I'm not saying we have
Right.
to be against a country, but I think we have to be honest as to who we really are, because our
Right.
home is Israel. Our identity is being Jewish is because we're from Judea. That's our nation. When we say Am Yisrael Chai, is the nation of Israel lives. So at some point, if God forbid America fought a war with Israel, you'd have to choose a side. And to all those that are Americans, they would say, oh, you see, you weren't American all along. So I do think it causes a problem where we're not fully honest with what we really are. And that doesn't mean you can't be a part of the society and be productive within that society. So there's an element of not understanding our identity that creates, I think, a lot of anti-Semitism or fear of the Jewish people as being another. But the more spiritual answer has a lot to do with something very, I guess, metaphysical and spiritual, and in my opinion, it's very Kabbalistic. So I see this world as one body. There's a singularity within each individual, but we're also part of larger singular structures. So you can be one person, but you're made up of several organs. Those several organs are made up of several cells. Those several cells are made up of several molecules and atoms. And then as a person, you come from a family, and that family comes from a region, and that region comes from a tribe and a nation, and so on, a country, and eventually you get to the whole world, and the whole world being a part of a whole universe. So there's a beauty in having a balance between being an individual as a greater part of one more holistic thing. So I see this planet as one body, and each nation being an organ. And each nation can choose what role, what organ they can be, but they need to understand that each organ is different, because the brain and the liver and the lungs and the skin and the nose, they all have different purposes, but they're all important and they need to work together in order to fulfill a certain cause. And in my opinion, not that we have these bodily functions, but we need to fulfill the purpose that we set out for ourselves. And the Jewish people set out for themselves to be the immune system. When we say tikkun olam and ola goim, which is, I think, something that has to be touched on, because a lot of people on the far right think this word goim or goy
They
is a
do see
negative
that
or
as that,
derogatory
yeah.
word. In fact, in the Torah, the word goy means nation. In fact, it refers sometimes to the Jews as goy because it's a nation. And when it
The
says in the Torah
nations.
goim,
Right.
it's talking about other nations. It's not saying someone that is lesser or more or different. It's saying other nations that are not the Jewish people. So when it says or lagoim, to be a light upon other nations, or to do tikkun olam, to help fix the world, that is the mission statement that the Jews themselves picked. Now, when it says chosen people, it's not God that chose the Jewish people. It's the Jewish people that chose the Torah. It's the Jewish people that chose this mission statement and this purpose to do tikkun olam and be ol hagoyim. Now, another nation can choose it. Another nation can choose tomorrow to be like, you know what? We also want to be the world's immune system. We also want to help fix the world. But that's irregardless. We chose to do that as well. And when we're not fulfilling that purpose, on a spiritual level, there's a rejection to the bodily function or the organ that is not properly functioning within the body. So if your body gets a transplant of an organ and that organ
It's going
is
to
not
attack it.
fitting for that body, the body rejects it and attacks it. Or when you have an organ that doesn't work, the whole body ends up being affected. You get pains, you get another disease, you get another this. And so the issue that I see here on a subconscious, maybe like very deep spiritual level, is that the Jews took on themselves to help fix this world, have the ability to use, for example, Israel or the places that they're achieved to get into positions of power, whatever else, to actually help the world. And we do it on an individual level. So you'll have a Jew spreading light here, you'll have someone doing there, but we're not doing it as a whole. We're not doing it as a collective. And because we're not doing it, in a way, subconsciously, we're getting blamed for the problems that exist. So it's not that we're creating those problems, but it's almost as if we have the ability to change those problems.
It's
And
just
because we're
like
not
not
using that
doing, it's just
ability
like
or the
purposely
commitment that
not
we
doing
took
it
to
or
change the
actually doing
problems,
bad. It's right.
yeah, it's even like a, not to give an analogy of a parent and a child to say that the Jews are the parents or anything, but to give the analogy of a parent and child, a parent has a responsibility over a child's life. When they bring a child into this earth or when they adopt a child, they have a responsibility to that child. And if they neglect that child, don't take care to their basic needs, even though they're doing nothing, that nothing
Absolutely.
is a wrong thing. and that nothing gets rejected, and sort of that child ends up hating or rejecting their parents for not doing that. So again, it's not to say that the Jews are the parents and everyone else is the child. It's to say that when you take on a responsibility yourself to do something and you don't do it, it's not that you committed the wrong act, but if you had the ability to actually change the thing, you're also complicit in a way and should be held responsible. And I think that is the very deep spiritual reason for why there's this unexplainable, subconscious, constant rejection and hatred towards the Jewish people within every community. That's something very unique to the Jewish people, because if you look at other communities, there's definitely racism, there's definitely homophobia, there's definitely Islamophobia, there are definitely like hatred of others. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, it exists within every single group. We're the only group of people that is the common enemy of all enemies.
Absolutely. I think I like to use the analogy of, like, if you see someone drowning and you could have saved them, or it was your job to save them and you didn't, it's just as good as you drowning them yourself, of you holding them underwater. Right,
And on top of
right.
that, you're a lifeguard.
Especially if you're a lifeguard. Yeah, I totally get that. And that's where all this stuff stems from, and it's a problem. What do you think is the solution? I mean, I know you say that it has to be from the ground up rather than the top down with government and stuff like that. Because I was going to ask you, have you ever thought of joining the Knesset, running for office and making a change from within the system itself? But I assume that you would turn around and say, I want to do this from the ground up, because that's where it needs to be fixed in order for it to have any lasting purpose. Because like any government, things can change. People can get revoted out of office, new ones coming in, people, but from the ground up, the people control the narrative. So what do you think is the best way to go about that? And do you think it's possible?
Yeah, so my dad told me something at a very young age. He told me that almost every organization and politician, almost every, originally gets started to serve a cause, but eventually uses the cause to serve them. And unfortunately, the way that the political system is structured in Israel causes politicians to focus on keeping their power and doing short-term things in order to get short-term results, in order to use those results to get reelected and to keep their power, rather than focusing on how do we shift the culture, how do we change the status quo, how do we move forward towards a better collective vision that unites Israelis and Palestinians in all sectors of Israeli society. And they focus less on that because that's not effective use of their time in order to maintain their positions of power. So for me to get into politics, definitely at this point now, it would mean having to be either on the left or on the right. And it would mean having all the right or all the left being against me, which is against my goal. My goal is more so to unite. And it would mean focusing on rising up amongst everyone else, competing, kind of dirtying the politics and the positions of other people to put myself in a position of power, and eventually focusing on maintaining that power rather than helping the people. So my goal is not necessarily what am I going to do to get myself there, is what position and role should I play to get my people there. And if that role is to not be in politics like it is now, and to create content and to inspire people and to educate people and to fight against anti-Semitism and to unite people, and if that's the most effective use of my time to help my nation go there, then I'm going to do that. And that's what I think right now, at this point in my life, that's the most effective way that I can utilize my skills and time on this earth, which is a gift, and to help my people move forward. Now, if one day getting into politics made sense, which I don't see how it could by the way it's structured, but if one day it would, I'm not ruling it out. But my goal is definitely not about getting me into a position of politics. And I definitely believe in long-term change, in greater change than just small little things. And that has to come from the bottom up, from the people, shifting the culture and the ideas. And I can give an example of that. When you look in America and the society, there are definitely issues of racism today within every society, and including within America. If you compare 80 years ago to today, 80 years ago, you did not have civil rights. 80 years ago, you didn't even have women rights. So how do we go from point A to point B today where we do have those rights? And let's say you were to go to a college campus 80 years ago, one could be openly racist and openly anti-women and get away with it. In fact, that would probably be the norm. And how is it that today you go to a college campus and if someone was anti-women or anti-black, that would be something completely rejected, and rightfully so. And the reason we got there is not by politicians, but by a shift within the culture. And that shift within the culture eventually impacted the way politics were done. And that's why it's important to raise and focus on the next generations, the future, the youth, how they see the world, how they understand the world, and curing the problems that exist and that transcends from previous generations or that are created within younger generations, and giving them an ability to see the world in a more holistic, inclusive, and acceptable way that accepts one another, in order for that to transition into when they go into positions of power, and then that's when they create policies and
Well,
so on.
since the time of the the Civil Rights Act and the Jim Crow laws and stuff like that in this country, we've seen a big shift in culture as far as academia, as far as the media going far left and staying there. And I know you said that you went to UCLA, right? Or was it Columbia?
I started at UCLA in Santa Monica College, and then I
Okay, so
transferred to
I
Columbia.
believe you said that you went to Columbia because it was the number one anti-Semitic campus that you researched and decided to
Correct.
go there to make a difference. Now, my thing is, you said if culture is what drives the changes in government, and we see that this culture is so powerful. Being the left, they control academia, they control the media, they control Hollywood, and it's an international philosophy. So what do you think is going to be the one shift and change that can counter that? And when I don't mean countering the left. I mean countering the culture that is overwhelmingly driving the narrative of pushing further division and racism and stuff like that, which is happening all over the world, not just in America, but it's very concentrated in America, I believe.
Yeah, so when it comes to generally the left or generally the right, neither of them are generally bad. It's when you go to an extreme and see the other side or other perspectives, as you're not even able to have conversations, you're not even able to see the humanity on the other side or have a greater understanding, and you get stuck into your echo chamber and see the other as your
But
enemy, that
that's
then it
becoming the
becomes
main
toxic
culture,
and a
though. That
problem.
far left
I
is becoming the main.
it is well, polarization is unfortunately happening on many issues in many different countries, and it's unfortunate like that's usually the time that eventually there's a huge explosion, whether it be a world war, whether it be something great. So it's unfortunate that our kind of society or this world in itself is becoming more and more polarized, but at the same time, we're being more and more interconnected. And what I mean by that is through social media, there's a lot of bad things that come from the internet and social media, but there are a lot of good things. We have the ability to communicate with one another. We have the ability to see the human face of the other. We have the ability to see the stories of the other. That was not a reality back in the day. So I use social media to get into the minds and hearts of Israelis and Palestinians and to have them understand each other's identities, each other's experiences, to create a more holistic version of the truth so that they understand both of the injustices that have been experienced by both the populations. And oftentimes, many Palestinians and Israelis come to me and say, wow, you shifted my worldview. Thank you so much for your videos and for your work. I want to also do this. I want to also spread light. And that was not a possibility that previous generations had. So I think that we have to look more towards what we have now and using that in a way that will help us move forward. Unfortunately, there are many people that are capitalizing on this current divide and using that divide to raise themselves up into positions of power or media that tends to profit from these situations and people suffering. So there is a problem, but I do think that we can move forward from it if we do the right things and we empower enough people that are accepting of the other, which is why, for me, long ago, I've rejected this concept of I'm on the right or I'm on the left, because I'm Rudy
Right.
and I have my own opinions. And to be honest, those opinions evolve. Every single
Amen.
human being has opinions that evolve. And what I agreed with 10 years ago is not necessarily the same things that I will agree in another 10 years. And I have the ability to disagree with myself previously and for my ideas to develop and to evolve and to change based on the experiences that I have and the conversation that I have and the things that I go. So it's important to be more open-minded and to have an open heart rather than just saying my beliefs are my beliefs and anyone against me is my enemy. And that's just a way to sort of push a zero-sum game solution. And a zero-sum game solution is an all-out war at the end of the day. Because if it's only your idea or nothing, and someone will never have your ideas, you're basically saying that other person has to go. And that's a horrible way of thinking, because not only is that not the way to find the ultimate truth and a greater reality where we can both live and have what we want, but it's also a way to maximize the chance of more war, more destruction, more pain, more death,
You know, one
more
of the
suffering.
things that you put up affected me big time was this video that you put out with it was you. I don't know if it was you. It was an Israeli and an Arab, and you had an Arab stand in the middle of Tel Aviv holding a sign that says, I'm an Arab and I love all Jews. Hug me if you love me too." And then you saw, you know, the Israelis walk by, they look at the sign, and then everyone went to go hug him. And then when it came to like the Jew going into East Jerusalem in a very Arab neighborhood, he admitted that he was a little scared, you know, and that is a healthy fear, but it's also unrealistic because of what happened after the fact. Like you said, most people just want to go on with their lives. Most people just want to go to work, take care of their family, be happy, and not bother with any of this bullshit. Um, but when it came to the concept, to the perception of how Palestinians were, I also did grow up thinking like they all hate us. You know, we don't hate them, but they hate us. But the truth is, some of them do, just like some Israelis hate Arabs, you know. But mostly that's not the case. And you had this Jewish guy go into East Jerusalem with a blindfold on, stand out there with his arms out with a sign that says, "I'm a Jew and I love all Arabs. Hug me if you love me too." And then you saw the Palestinians walking around. They saw the sign, they stopped. A lot, it took them a couple of seconds to, you know, they wanted to make sure it wasn't like a trap or something weird. But then you saw them hug this man. You saw them come, their wife hug this man. They brought their kid, their baby to hug this man. So it really opened up my eyes. And I feel like there needs to be way more videos like that go viral rather than the opposite, the bad ones, the exception, the minority, the killers, you know, that killed, slaughtered the whole Vogel family, sensationalized all over the whole world.
Mhm.
And then you think all Palestinians are just coming into Israel and slaughtering innocent people. When the truth is, it's a minority. It's extremism. And that goes on both sides. That goes on all sides. And I think there needs to be way more videos like that. And your video is I think is beautiful, man. I think that was amazing. And you know, I even had this idea with my old friend, with my friend who used to be my best friend. He's Algerian Muslim. He stopped being friends with me because of my support for Trump. Unfortunately, can't break that barrier. But before that, I always wanted to say, you know, since I'm a Jew and you're a Muslim and we're best friends, I want to do a video with you where we can walk into the street and just show everyone that we could be best friends and show the whole world that there's no hate here. You know, it's not polarized. It's not like over there. Like I've seen Israelis, you know, see an Arab, just someone they don't even know in Israel, and they both look at each other like they want to kill each other, like two dogs that made eye contact, and they're just flexing on each other. You know, it's horrible. It's a horrible thing to see, and over here in this country, for the most part, it doesn't go that way. I've seen, you know, I remember I was 10 years old. I was hanging out with a few of my friends. One of them was black, one of them was Chinese, one of them was Jewish, one of them was Indian. And we're all hanging out in the McDonald's, and I'm looking around and I'm like, yo, isn't it amazing that we could all just hang out. We're all different, and it's like it's nothing over here. It's the most, I mean, granted, it is the most diverse place in the country, in the world, New York. So I just appreciated that, and now I feel like we're going backwards, and that's why I said this shift of this culture driving the narratives, culture driving politics to go a certain direction is actually hurting us. It's setting us back. So I know your goal is to bring us forward, to move forward and helping people. But what do you do when you counter a movement that's not only stifling you moving forward, but it's actually causing everything to go back, which is completely counterproductive. What do you say to that?
Well, first to touch on the video that you mentioned, you know, when we came into it, we didn't know what kind of outcome would come out. We thought that there would be some sort of violence or some sort of rejection or someone grabbing the sign, but to the contrary, everyone had very positive reaction. And there was something that wasn't showed in the video, is that it took around 40 minutes for the first person to
Really?
hug the Israeli, whereas it took a few seconds on the Israeli side for someone to hug the Palestinian. And that's not because they didn't want to hug the Israeli. It's because they were constantly looking around, not to see if it was a setup on the side of Israelis, but to see what would be the reaction of the
Ah,
society, because it's so played down and not allowed to normalize and accept Israelis. In fact, a lot of my friends that I work with that are Palestinian leaders, if I post a picture with them, they would be sitting in a Palestinian prison the next day and interrogated for why normalizing relations with Israelis. So there is an element within the systemic, not necessarily culture, but the systemic rules that exist within the society of the Palestinians because of those in power that forces Palestinians to be afraid of normalizing. That doesn't mean they don't want to normalize. That doesn't mean that that's not their intention. But there is something there that is different than in Israeli society, whereas anyone supporting or going and hugging a Palestinian, from the left to the right, except for the extremes of both, would see that as something completely normal and that would praise such a thing. But yeah, overall, I think it was a beautiful video to show Israelis and Palestinians are humanity. And that's actually the video that I made, one of my first videos, and it's still to this day my most viral video. Collectively, with all the platforms that posted this video, this is before cross-posting and before IGTV even, it got, I think, over or
nice.
almost 10 million views, which is a lot, especially for when I first started making content. In terms of how do we move forward, I think if we look historically, there are always times where there's adversity and people trying to polarize and use people against each other. I think we have to use what we have today, which is our ability to connect with one another through social media, through internet, through easy access of travel, through all these things that we have, and a generation that is more open-minded because we are all raised with just a plethora of information and an access to information and an ability to understand things deeper than just the conversations we have amongst each other, and to use that to spread more light than darkness. Now, you can use social media to spread darkness. You can
Absolutely.
use social media to spread lies, to spread polarization, to spread the hatred and to create enemies, or you can use it to do something else. So I think if more people use it to do something else and expose the platforms and the individuals that use it to do something bad, or show them, because maybe as their intentions may not be bad, but that's what they're doing, show them what they're doing actually being bad, then maybe we can spread more light where there is darkness and light in this world. And I do believe that if we seriously try, like Herzl had a saying, if you will it, it is no dream. Meaning, if you really believe in it and you go and you do it, there's no such thing as it's just a dream. It just has to take effort and keep pushing and keep doing it, and
Absolutely.
eventually you get there.
Do you have time to take questions from the ones watching? All right, so let
Yeah,
me
sure,
scroll up a little bit
sure.
because it's been a little while and read some of these out. So someone wrote, hold on, damn, it's kind of a book you wrote here. Um, I am Israel. I came to a land without people, for people without a land. Those people who happened to be here had no right to be here, and my people showed them they had to leave or die, razing 400 Palestinian villages to the ground, erasing their history. I am Israel. Some of my people committed massacres and later became prime ministers to represent me in 1948.
Okay, let me
Yeah,
answer it right there. So we don't, no one in like discourse of Israelis or people that are Zionists or Jews think that there was no one prior to 48. In fact, there were many Jews that always had a constant presence. Jerusalem, for the most time, since the destruction of Jerusalem, was majority Jewish. You had Druzim, you had Bedouin, you had Cherkessim, you had Greek Orthodox, you had Armenians, you had Arab Christians, there are Muslims. So no one is saying that there were no people. We were there, and a lot of us came back and kicked off the British. And unfortunately, post the liberation of Judea slash Israel, when we decolonized it from the British, there was a war where the surrounding Arab countries and a lot of the local Arabs attacked Israel. Attacked Israel with the intention of ethnically cleansing the Jewish population. They did so in 48, in 67, in 73, and in other wars and other attempts through intifadas. And the consequences of those wars is the status quo today. Now, a lot of the blame that I attribute to why we were fighting in 48 and afterwards actually comes from the British. Because in the Palestinian perspective, the British were siding with the Israelis, the Jews, the Zionists. And in the Jewish Israeli Zionist perspective, the British were siding with the Arabs. And in reality, the British were siding with neither. They were siding with themselves. And what they did is similar to what they did with India and Pakistan and other places that they had colonized. They divided and conquered. They made the perception of one group feel like they were with the oppressive side, making the experience or the firsthand front line thing that you need to attack to fight the oppressor, to fight the occupation, the other person that has a right to live there. And unfortunately, we're still stuck on these generic narratives that the cause of my suffering is you and the cause of my suffering is you. And until we break free from that and understand that there was suffering here, there was suffering here, it was not intentional to hurt you, it was not intentional to hurt you, it's because we thought that we were doing the right thing and we thought that we were doing the right thing. And now, how do we move forward from here? We need to be able to establish a reality that ends the injustices that both experience, Israelis and Palestinians, and fulfills the aspirations needed. Meaning we need to remove this wall. We need to be able to give freedom of access of movement and freedom of access of resources, and no more army in Judea and Samaria. We should have police there. There should be civilian areas. You should have armies on the borders, not in the middle of lands. We should have equal rights, equal movements, and also reality that allows the aspirations of both populations to be fulfilled, which there are theorized ideas of how to get there. For example, a federation plan would allow the experience of Jews when they're coming to Israel to feel like a Jewish state, and the experience of Palestinians when they're coming to the civilization to be a Palestinian state. And it would allow both to actually maintain their needs. So we need to focus more on how do we move forward from there, rather than looking in the past and trying to blame and play victim Olympics as to you're the cause of all problems, because neither are the cause of all problems. The British were a large part of the cause of the problems that forced one against the other, empowering the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, an individual who met with Hitler and said, you need to come to Palestine after you finish killing the Jews there, you need to kill the Jews here, and empowering certain individuals like that, which gave the experience and the understanding of the Jews that the Arabs were the enemy. And the British signed the Balfour Declaration, which again is just a paragraph piece of worthless paper that was signed in the 1920s. Israel was liberated in 1948 after they terrorized the British in order for them to leave. They had no intention to leave, but they had written that paper to give the impression to Arabs that the British were siding with them. So both of the actions being done to Israelis and Palestinians see the other as the enemy, and we were really played. So we need to transcend out of these common narratives, and create a future that allows both to, again, end the injustices that we experience and fulfill the aspirations that we
Guys,
need.
type up your question so he can answer. So one of them asked, so I've never seen a neo-Nazi. Where are they? So where did you find these neo-Nazis?
Well, I've seen plenty of neo-Nazis. My first experience with a neo-Nazi was when I was 7 years old. Like I said earlier in the talk, me and my younger brother and my mother went onto the red tour bus, the double-decker of London, and the bus driver saw my mom's shirt that had Hebrew, asked if we were Jewish, or sorry, if it was written in Jewish. And my mom said, no, it's written in Hebrew, but it's the language of the Jewish people, if that's what you're asking, because maybe he was just ignorant. And he's like, oh, so you guys are Jews? And she's like, yeah, we're Jewish. And he's like, I don't want any Jews on my bus. You have to get off. And my mom refused, and he literally grabbed my mom and threw her off the
Wow.
bus. And a lot of things happened. People got involved. Police was called. But that was my first experience with neo-Nazis. I've seen plenty since. You can find them online
No, but
all
where'd you
over.
see
They're
them
very
here
loud
in
online.
America?
You can. Oh, so the two videos that I have in America are from an
Oh,
APAC conference that I went to. They were protesting outside, and they came to me and, spewing their horrible opinions, and all Jews need to be killed. They need to be lawfully executed. The Jews are the cause of all problems. Get out of America. This is a white country, and I'm English. All this horrible things that they were saying. And it's crazy that in some of those videos, in one of them, there's actually a Palestinian woman that comes up and defends me, because she's like, by your own logic, you don't belong here because this is the land of the Native Americans. And it's unfortunate that we have to have such enemies come and unite us, which is usually what happens to countries when they're in times of war, that people are united, unless there's something greater than that can unite them. But neo-Nazis are, in a lot of places, and there are many neo-Nazis in
so
America.
I have a question. Um, when it comes to,
Sure.
I know you don't really get into American politics, but when it came to Trump bringing peace into the to the region of between Israel and United Arab Emirates, I wanted you to expand on that, because when we spoke the other day, it really made a lot of sense to me how you broke it down. And I understand you don't agree with with Trump's peace plan, not because he has bad intentions, but because you believe there's a better way to do it. You don't believe in a two-state solution. You believe in a one place where the people can live harmoniously together. But when Trump helped Israel bring peace with the United Arab Emirates and followed by other nations, what did you think of that, and how do you interpret it? As a good thing, bad thing, or yeah, what's your opinion about it?
Sure. So towards what a solution could look like, it has to first address two things for both peoples, like I said earlier. Has to solve the injustices, which are different for both, and fulfill the aspirations, which are different for both. And once we understand that, then we can build off of that together. And definitely not having another country or another society or another people imposing solutions on us. So I'm completely against the two-state solution in Trump's peace plan, not only because a two-state solution does neither for either people, does not solve the injustice for either, and it does not fulfill the aspirations for either. So it's just a plan that would never actually solve any problems. But on top of that, it being imposed by another country
But do you
telling
think a
us
two-state
what we should
solution
do.
is only
I think that it's
being the offer on the table because a one-state solution wasn't being accepted before?
no, so no one-state solution was ever offered. There's the story of King Solomon, who was not only a king but also a judge. And there are these two mothers that come to King Solomon, and they both bring the same baby, and they claim to be the mother of this baby. And King Solomon basically says, you know what? Let's cut the baby in half. You get one half, and you get the other. And one mother says, sure, and the other mother says, no, 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 it's actually her baby. And when he was able to see that mother saying no in order to save that child's life, he was able to know who the true mother was. If you're willing to divide this land, which is not property, which is not territory, it's our soulmate, it shows that you're not the true mother. And that's how a lot of Jews and Palestinians see this land. And so this land is not something that can be divided. And this is the vast majority of Jews and Arabs and Palestinians and Israelis that view this in this way. Plus, it's just not possible. You have 700,000 Jews living in Judea and Samaria. There's no way to displace them from the land without causing a civil war or huge, traumas and human right violations, security issues. What happened in Gaza would happen there if you had that. Even if you were to do it in a peaceful way, it would not resolve the injustices of Palestinians not being able to visit their families in Akko
I
and,
agree.
and in
It's
Jaffa and in
causing
other
more. It
places,
would
and
be
Israelis
causing
to
more
go to
division.
Shem
But I
and to.
feel like I don't think he has bad intentions. I feel like he thinks that's what they want. They want their own state, and Israel wants their own state. But that's not the case. I feel like they all want the same place, and they need to learn to live together rather than separated by some imaginary line. And that would cause more division, more problems, just like the Gaza, Gaza, where they're separated into three sections, and even that came through a peace deal. That's still not working. There's still problems as far as that.
I'll tell you my analysis as of today, August 30th, 2020, with the information I currently have. I think the peace deal that Trump proposed, he knew that the Palestinian Authority would reject it. He knew that a lot of Palestinians would see it as an insult. He knew that most Israelis would see it as a joke and that that's not something that would ever happen. And that most politicians in power in the coalition would say, oh, yeah, well, we'll accept it because we know that the other side will reject it, but that's not really what we want. And he did that because it was the official document that finally allowed certain Gulf countries to sign on an acceptance, which officially created diplomatic relations between Israel and those countries. And it was in a way to say, okay, well, I propose this. Palestinians are the bad guys now because they rejected it, and not all Palestinians, but the Palestinian leadership, which again, something very important to note is the Palestinian leadership does not represent Palestinians. There's no democratic elections. It's the same person that is on his 15th, 16th year of his 4-year term, Abu Mazen. Same with Hamas, that they're a total dictatorship and horrible leadership for the Palestinians living in Gaza. But he knew that Palestinians would reject it, thus giving, okay, well, I tried to bring both on the table. One rejected it. So now we're going to let the people there decide and do what he wants. Bibi, do what you want. Now, Bibi started speaking of annexation. Or some people say restoration, because annexation is technically not the right term to use it for this land. And we're talking about Judea and Samaria, which is the heartland of the Jewish people. when it came to that, there was no actual move towards really making Area C, which was the only part in conversation, 3 to 30% of Area C, which the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria is divided into Area A, B, and C. The conversation was around 3 to 30%, and it was just never going to happen. It was just a bunch of political drama to bring this out. And again, I think it's part of the same strategy to eventually get the UAE to sign and agree to officialize the relationships that they've had for many, many years already, but to officialize publicly this relationship together, because they did so in a way of saying, oh, well, we're doing it as long as Israel refuses to annex as of now, so we're doing it on behalf of the Palestinians. And now we already have diplomatic official relations because of the peace deal, and it was all in order to get to this final movement. Now, I don't think the UAE cares at all of the Palestinians. I'm very happy that they recognize Israel, made peace with Israel, and I hope many other countries in the region do so as well, so that we can unite as a Middle East, help one another with technology, with water resources, with education, with all sorts of things that we need to live as one united Middle East. Not necessarily as one country, but united in terms of, being at peace and being able to help one another. But again, I don't think the peace achieved is solely because of Trump, but Trump definitely played a role in doing
It's
that.
better than
The
asking
final
Israel to go
outcome
back
of
to the
having
1967
peace,
borders.
well, sure, the final peace is an amazing thing and something that should be celebrated. There are certain things that along disagree with, for example, bringing up a two-state solution, or having America tell Israel and the Palestinians how they should create their civilization, or having the UAE have to specifically condemn the Jews having a right to live in Judea and Samaria as a way to eventually get peace.
Right.
There are a lot of things to criticize, but overall, the picture of having
Rebecca
peace in the Middle East
Mentor
is something
wrote,
great.
do you think the Trump peace deal will cause more nations to want to be a part of it because they don't want to align themselves with Iran?
A part of what?
Do you think the Trump peace deal
A
will
part
cause
of
more?
agreeing with the peace deal,
Part of
or
the
a part of the
alliance. I'm
alliance with?
assuming part of the alliance with Israel, because they don't want to
I don't
align
think that
themselves
the
with
peace
Iran.
deal has. So I think that it's kind of mixing two different issues. I don't think the peace deal has to do with the reason for why more Gulf countries that are Sunni would align themselves with Israel, because they're at war with the Shia Iranian regime. Um, I don't think that the peace deal has anything to do, but I do think the fact that there's a divide between Sunni and Shia causes a lot of Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia and Oman and Bahrain and other Gulf countries, UAE, to want to get closer to Israel, because again, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But I hope we're able to transcend this reality where we have enemies in the Middle East and we can more so unite.
Someone wrote, and this is a good point. Someone wrote, Hamas, Gaza picked Hamas. Now, I remember when I spoke to you the other day, I said the same thing. I said, they voted in for Hamas, but can you explain to them the way you explained to me? And it kind of opened up my eyes as far as that, where you said they actually thought they had good intentions, including Israel, when it came to Hamas.
Yes, so let's say you vote in a political party or a politician into power, and originally they're seen as good people, but eventually become monsters and have now taken over power. You can't blame the original intention of voting that party or individual in when that wasn't what they were selling to the people that voted for them. Now, Hamas was actually seen as more secular, more moderate. Israelis supported Hamas to take in power because it was different than the PLO, than Fatah, which was seen as more, causing the intifadas and causing and promoting, incentivizing terrorism. So the Israeli government, a lot of them were supporting Hamas to take, like vocally supporting that Hamas should take over power. And Palestinians voted them in because they thought that they would bring a better life to their society. And then they took over power. They killed every single Fatah member. They kill anyone who disagrees with them. They kill anyone that is LGBTQ plus. They oppress women. They put bombs and mortars and rockets in schools and in UN facilities and in civilian locations. They use human shields. They send people to the borders to throw things and shoot things at IDF soldiers, which causes people to die. Like, their whole game is basically zero sum for Israel's destruction. So, and I don't think anyone should blame the people living in Gaza for why and how Hamas is doing what they're doing, and what the reality is today. That's
Someone
not what they
says they
voted for.
don't want peace. Someone says Right. Yeah, that's
Hamas
true.
doesn't want peace, but
Right.
that doesn't mean Palestinians in Gaza don't want peace or didn't want peace by voting it
So,
Hamas in.
before we wrap this up, I want to ask you if you can give one word of advice to anyone watching, what would it be?
Wow, so it really depends on what. But I think everyone needs to, this is what I usually say when someone asks me that question. I think every individual has to try to look at their own lives, understand the settings that they're in, the problems that exist, the potential solutions that can occur, the skills that you have, the skills that you can acquire, and doing your best every single day to use your skills to acquire more skills and to make this world a better place and to fix the problems that you see both on the micro and macro level. And it's important to understand that this question that you ask yourself is a question that you should ask yourself really every day, because within a day your life can change. Within a day you can move to a new place, a new job, a new chapter of your life. All of a sudden you have children, you have a role to play for the children. All of a sudden, you find a new family member, you whatever it is, like every single day you have to ask your question, and how do you better yourself to
Absolutely.
help
I
better this
agree.
world?
I think that's think it's amazing. I think you're super bright, and I think you have a lot more. You have a really bright future ahead of you, and I think you're doing great work. I admire you. I learned a lot from you. I hope you guys learned a lot from Rudy. Rudy, tell them where they could find you, follow you, and any other content or projects that you have coming out.
Yeah, so we have a lot of really cool projects coming up. We have a video of a 3-on-3 Israelis and Palestinians having a really deep conversation about the conflict and their future. That should be amazing. I'm going to Africa soon to shoot a documentary on the Jewish tribes that are located in Nigeria, Uganda, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and potentially Congo, Ghana, and Madagascar as well, and Ethiopia, of course, as well. So that should be a really cool documentary. Where you can find me, you can find me on my Facebook page. Type in Rudy Rochman. If you type in facebook.com / rudyrochman.page, that's the link itself. On Instagram, it's Rudy_Israel. On Twitter, Rudy_Rochman, Rochman. And if you type in my name on YouTube as well, you can find me there, Rudy
Awesome.
Rochman.
Hopefully, you listen. It's wishful thinking, but hopefully, I get to work with you someday and do some great work because I'm all about the same thing, man. I want to put out the truth. Even though I'm more into American politics than you are, and I still have a lot to learn from you as far as Israeli politics, because I feel like they do coincide. They do relate to each other. They do have something to do with each other. America could sneeze and Israel can catch a cold. You know what I mean? So I feel like they're both interconnected, and I would love to work with you some more, maybe even create some content. And we can see if we could do something, and hopefully more people will learn, more people will open up their eyes and learn the truth. And like you said, we're ever evolving. Every day I'm looking at my own things. I'm always debating people on the left. I'm debating people just to get a different sense, a different point of view, but also try to understand where there's common ground, so we can actually have a conversation. And I really admire that about you, that you're able to do that. So thank you for coming on. I appreciate you, man. If you guys have any more questions, you can reach out to Rudy. Check out his content. Check out and follow him. Like, subscribe on all of his channels, and you will really, really enjoy his videos, man. Like I did. I once you get started, is I'm just telling you right now, grab the popcorn. You're never gonna stop because it's super, super interesting. And I look forward to seeing more from you, man. Thank you, Rudy. I
Okay,
appreciate
thank
you,
you for
man.
having me.
Talk soon. Yeah, bye.
Yalla, akhi. Bye.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed that like I did. I think it was amazing. I think he's super, super bright, super brilliant, dude. Thank you guys for watching. Please like, share this post to help people get a better understanding. If you don't agree, that's okay too. But as long as you see a different perspective, it's always good to see other perspectives. Thank you guys for watching. Be back to do another live soon with another guest as well that you guys will love. Please keep sharing the content. If you could donate, that would be great. Cash App, Bo Knows the Truth, or PayPal, click play. You don't have to donate if you don't want to, just help support my work. But if you guys don't, at the very least, share this, spread the word. Someone asked, is any new song coming? I just put out a recent rap. I have stuff coming out. I'm working on a lot of different things, especially now with COVID-19. It's made it very difficult to stay the same course that I was going on before. But I still have a lot of things I'm working on. As you can see, I'm trying to link up with some really great minds and hopefully do some great work out there. And I appreciate you guys watching. Be good, stay safe. We'll talk soon. Keep a lookout. I should be out live again soon. And look out for more videos. And my recent video that just came out, The Illogical Left, please like it, share it, and help spread the truth more and more. I love you guys. Thank you guys for watching. Be good, stay safe, and stay sexy. Bye, guys.